Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel on meaning. What we're going to do today is something a little different, but something very near and dear to my heart, and it's a form of what's called bibliotherapy. Bibliotherapy is something that I very much believe in, which is you read for your therapy. You read some of the great works of literature or philosophy, and that can help you get through whatever you're going through, because a lot of my approach is based on the assumption, and I think the verification, that what the ancients talked about and in older literature, a lot of the things that they talked about, they can help us the most. They help us the most out of anything. These weren't idiots that lived way back then. They sat around, they were really dissecting these things and these ideas of how to live a good life. As I've said before, Viktor Frankl is my favorite philosopher, and he has a lot in common. There's a lot of overlap between Viktor Frankl and the Stoics. This is the stack of books of the Stoics that I have. I have a few others. But essentially the big crossover, or the major similarity that the Stoics and Frankl have, is that when you're faced with a set of circumstances that you can't change, you have one thing left to change, and that's yourself. That's your mindset. That's your perspective of the circumstances. Because if we change our perspective of the circumstances, that may lead to a different action, which then might lead to a different outcome. Cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially based on that philosophy, that while we can't control everything around us, we can control the attitude and the perspective in which we face the things that are happening to us. So what I'd like to do today is go through some of my favorite quotes from the Stoics and how I apply them to the clients that I work with, and just how I apply them to myself in everyday life. Now, there are three main authors of Stoicism that we have left. These are the three big ones that a lot of people will turn to. And it's Seneca. Seneca is a philosopher, a Stoic philosopher, that I would say if I were to have dinner with any one of them, Seneca's your guy. Seneca seems to be more personable. He wrote in a more personable and relatable way, at least in my opinion, than the other Stoics. He seems like the guy that you could have a really great dinner conversation with. So that's Seneca. The next one that we'll talk about is Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome. And Marcus Aurelius's work on Stoicism was really interesting because in his book Meditations, he didn't necessarily set out to have his book published. This was mainly his journal. Marcus Aurelius, as compared to Seneca, would be the guy who isn't necessarily at a dinner table having a really interesting intellectual chat with someone, but he would rather be the person, you can kind of get this image of him in his room, journaling to himself, really trying to figure these things out. It's very interesting. We'll get to Marcus Aurelius. The third Stoic that we'll also talk about is Epictetus. Epictetus is someone that I really relate to. Epictetus was once a slave, and he went through insanely difficult things. And so there's kind of a sense of, at least in my opinion, a deeper credibility to what Epictetus, and the other Stoics, by the way, learned from Epictetus. Epictetus was, you could think of Epictetus as having a classroom of students. He's the wise professor, really laying all these theories out and how to really live a life that is meaningful and full of virtue, and something that you can be proud of in the end. Let's start with Seneca. Seneca, I'll read a quote from Seneca. He says, "So we should make light of all things and endure them with tolerance. It is more civilized to make fun of life than to bewail it." I love that, because what Seneca is doing is he's talking about something that I really try to help my clients institute in their life, which is a sense of humor. Because I learned a long time ago that if I'm not laughing about what I'm going through, if I can't find a way to laugh about what I'm going through, I'm going to be crying. It's going to be so miserable. And I love that he pairs the term civilized with humor. To make light and to make light of life is a civilized way, rather than sitting and bewailing it. So I love that. Humor is a great therapeutic tool that I use all the time with my clients. In his other book, Letters from a Stoic, Seneca talks about how do we know when we're making progress. This is a great thing that I use all the time. It's a very common question in therapy. Ron, am I making progress? Is this going anywhere? What progress have I made? I am beginning to be my own friend. That is progress indeed. I love that. It's very simple, to the point. And what's interesting is that if you think about being a true friend to yourself, a true friend, if you were to now kind of separate yourself from yourself and imagine like you're talking to someone else, a true friend doesn't encourage you to engage in terrible behaviors. A true friend doesn't shame you. A true friend encourages you. A true friend is honest with you. And so when you're making progress and you're being a true friend to yourself, you're being honest, you're being caring, you're being forgiving, but you're also at times saying, hey, get up, get going, work harder, do what you need to do. Don't do that. That's not going to help you. True progress, or how do I know when I'm making progress, is when you're a true friend to yourself. Second philosopher that we're going to talk about, Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. And by the way, I highly recommend you guys get all of these. Stoicism is great because it's full of very practical and pragmatic advice to help with living. Meditations, Marcus Aurelius. This is a great one that I share with my clients a lot. Because in this world it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, to feel like we just are being pulled in so many different directions. As in Lord of the Rings, Bilbo, when he's talking to Gandalf right before his quest to leave the Shire and to go live with the elves, he says, I feel like butter spread over too much bread. How many people can relate to that? In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius says, if you seek tranquility, do less. Just do less. But then he goes on to say, which brings a double satisfaction. To do less, better. So if you want peace, look at your life. See where you're unnecessarily overcomplicating things. Do less. And then what he says, which is so genius, you get a double satisfaction. If you do less, the things that you do continue to do, you'll do them better, which then will probably make you feel better about how you're managing your life. This may offend people, but a really funny thing that I hear sometimes in therapy is when all hell is breaking loose in their life, what do people do? They get a dog. Don't get a dog. If your life is overly complicated, now I'm not saying that animals can't help people, I get that, but 9 times out of 10, when I see people go down that route of, I have a lot of chaos in my life, I'm going to get a dog, it's like, oh no, don't do that, don't do that. You need to do less, you need to do less. Because in my mind, that idea of doing less and doing less better is verified. It continually is verified and validated as being probably the better direction to go. Second thing from Marcus Aurelius. This quote is amazing. It's a little lengthy, but just stick with me. Because this one applies a lot to people who just don't feel like getting out of bed, who really struggle, who really can get worn down by the grind. And if this quote doesn't get you revved up and ready to go, I don't know what will. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for? The things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm? But it's nicer here. So you were born to feel nice? Instead of doing things and experiencing them? Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders and bees going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best they can, and you're not willing to do your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands? He then goes on to say, you don't love yourself enough, or you love your nature too, and what it demands of you. People who love what they do wear themselves down doing it. They even forget to wash or eat. That's unbelievable. Marcus Aurelius, man, he nailed it on that one. We are not meant to huddle under the blankets. We're not meant to stay comfortable. That is nice, and it's a blessing when it comes, but we're meant to get up and get after it. And so when you see everything else in this natural world doing its part, use that not as shame, but use it as motivation to get up and do your part. Lastly, Epictetus. Epictetus is actually my favorite, as you can tell by the many tabs that I've laced his book with. Epictetus is unbelievable. Like I said, his history really inspires me. He was a slave, freed in his 30s, And so there's a certain credibility to what he's saying. And if he can go through being a slave and still come out saying things like this, then maybe worth paying attention to. Now, this particular quote I'm going to read, I want you to think of this in the context of social media. So many people come in, adults and teens alike, struggling with depression and anxiety. And I asked them what their relationship is to social media. And no shocker, the more engaged and involved you are with social media, the more likely it is you're going to be depressed. Because what naturally happens is it robs us of our joy, because we're comparing ourselves. We're comparing ourselves all the time to things we see on social media and people that we follow. So this is what Epictetus says, which, by the way, obviously there was no social media when he was alive, but still relevant, if not more so. You will never have to experience defeat if you avoid contests whose outcome is outside your control. Don't let outward appearances mislead you into thinking that someone with more prestige, power, or some other distinction must on that account be happy. Just because you're following some celebrity and it seems like they have everything going for them, that does not mean, just on what you see, their prestige or their power, that they're happy. And let me tell you, sitting across from people for thousands upon thousands of hours, listening to them as they gain more and more material possession, prestige, and power, I'm telling you, it does not make you more happy. It doesn't. Epictetus nailed it. Now, I saved this last quote because this is one of the quotes that Epictetus is most well known for. He even says it on the back of the book because it's so well known. The quote I'm about to read you from Epictetus really goes hand in hand with what Frankl talks about, in that when you face circumstances that you cannot change, what are you going to do about it? That's what you have left. That's what you have left within your control, is how you respond to these things. And Epictetus here is talking about things like death. I mean, we cannot escape death. We know we're going to die. Okay, but this is what he says. I must die, but must I die bawling? I must be put in chains, but moaning and groaning too? I must be exiled, but is there anything to keep me from going with a smile, calm and self-composed? That's the kind of attitude you need to cultivate if you would be a philosopher. The sort of sentiments you should write down every day and put in practice. That's it. I know I must die, but must I die bawling? We all face things that are unavoidable, that we're going to have to face, that we cannot escape. You still have the choice of the attitude you take on. And when you choose the right attitude in which you face these things, it can be very deeply meaningful. It can give you that extra strength to keep your integrity and your virtue intact. You're going to die. We're all going to die. But must we die bawling? We may be a slave to the circumstances, but do we have to go moaning and groaning? No, we don't. Epictetus argues that we don't. And I fully back up that statement. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to face our circumstances with the right attitude. But when you have powerful reminders of how to do that, and you have a reminder that people were struggling with this and have been struggling with these ideas for a very long time, maybe it makes you feel less alone. And maybe it's just that much more motivation and strength to choose the right attitude to adopt when you face things that are out of your control. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Those are just a few excerpts of really deep Stoic thought that I find very practical. Now, I recommend Stoicism. It's a great thing to learn about and to try to apply in your life. If you don't want to necessarily dive into the original texts, if you feel that may be a little daunting for you, I'd recommend you check out anything from Ryan Holiday. Ryan Holiday's been really vital in the revival of Stoicism as a great way to live virtuously and to live a good life. So any books from Ryan Holiday would be good. It's a very easy way to dive into the world of the Stoics. So I recommend either checking out anything out from Ryan Holiday or go into the original text yourself. You can't go wrong. Thanks.